This is part 3 of Microsoft Access tutorial, and in the first two parts we created 3 tables. These tables, table clients, employees, and the junction table between them, work completed. And we filled, I believe, table clients with some dummy data as well as table employees, but table work completed is empty right now. So this is what we have right now, 3 tables. And if you didn't watch the previous 2 parts, part 1 and part 2 of this tutorial, then you probably should not watch part number 3 just yet. So go back to previous parts and watch them, because they kind of go in sequence. We go through the same example and we're building it more and more from one part to another part of these videos. Also, as I said before, I do highly advise you and recommend that you follow what we do in these video tutorials yourself in parallel, and also all the work that you do with Microsoft Access, save it on your flash drive that you carry all the time with you. Okay, so part 3. This is our database as it exists right now: clients, employees, and work completed. And we just finished at the end of part 2 designing table work completed. So now let's fill it up with dummy data. Right now I'm in the design view, so I want to switch from design view into the datasheet view. So on the tab design, table, not a table, button view, so switch from the design view to the datasheet. Okay, so here is my table. Suppose, for example, I want to record that on September the 12th, 2016, I sent client number, employee number 1 to work for client number 1, and the work description, so my the note that I put down, what kind of work was done. The work that I did was design, database design. Okay. And this person 01, I believe, let me take a look at employees. Person 01 is John Smith. So John Smith worked on September the 12th, 2016 to client number 1, which is ABC Limited Liability Company. And he worked there for 8 hours, for example. And I hit enter, and the next line is highlighted, meaning that this record that I just created is committed to the memory, so it's part of the permanent storage. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out is when I clicked on the field work date, I didn't just type 9/12/2016. I actually selected this date from this special tool right there, date picker. How come it's there? Where does it come from? Well, actually it's pretty easy. If I switch back to design view, then work date, when I was designing this table for the field work date, I picked the data type date time. So this is just a convenient tool if you want for Access to prompt users to enter the date in the right format to begin with. So every time when I click on the work date, it shows up for me this convenient date selector. So this is just a utility, convenient utility built into Microsoft Access. Okay, let's keep going. For example, same date, September the 12th, I sent to the same client 01, ABC Limited Liability Company. My other employee number is 02, which is, I believe, Jane Doe, so I put number 2. And being the manager, she did some managerial tasks, for example, contract negotiation. Contract negotiation. All right. And let's say that she didn't spend the entire day negotiating contract, but 5.5 hours. When I hit enter, it highlights the next line, so this line is committed to memory, but instead of 5.5, I see 6. And clearly I want to be able to enter numbers that are fractional, right? So if it was 5 hours and 30 minutes, and I should charge my clients for 5 hours and 30 minutes, not for the entire 6 hours. What if I put 5.4? 5.4 is becoming a 5. So apparently what happens is the database rounds my integers, which are actually decimals, not integers, to the nearest integer number. And I'd like to be able to enter decimals, not just whole integers. So how do I fix that? Well, problem is obviously with my field hours worked. So I have to go back to the design view and see what I can do. So hours worked, data type is numbers, as it should be, but in the bottom part of Microsoft Access, I see field properties, field size, long integer. So the keyword is integer. That's the reason why every time when I enter the decimal, Microsoft Access is rounding that up or down to the nearest integer. Now let's see what my options are. So I click on this list of different possibilities. Clearly I don't want that to be either integer or long integer, so I want to be something else. Well, let's try this one, double. So double accuracy, double precision. That means that I can actually save numbers that are fractions, right? So let's save it and let's switch back to the datasheet view. So here in my line number 2, instead of 5 whole hours, I type 5.5, then I hit enter, and it looks like the problem's solved, right? So now I can save decimal numbers. Okay, good. So let's keep going. Now I'm going to do something a little bit weird over here, okay? So I'm going to say that on the same date, for example, doesn't really matter, September 12, 2016, I sent to the client number 1 my employee number 3, which doesn't exist, by the way, right? Because my table employees right now contains only 2 different employees. Employee number 3, and they did something. I'm not going to even try to come up with anything. For 5 hours or for 4 hours, doesn't really matter. So when I hit enter, what happens is I see the next line is highlighted. That means that this line was already, this record was already committed to the memory, as if there's nothing wrong with it. But we clearly can see that there is something definitely wrong, right? I don't have an employee number 3, and yet database allows me to keep records about non-existing employees. And same thing happens if I have a non-existing client. For example, right now I have only 2 clients. 1 ABC Limited Liability Company and 2 XYZ Incorporated. What if I send my imaginary employee number 3 to work on my imaginary client number 3? Now I hit enter and it's still okay. So database right now allows me to do some weird things. And that clearly should not be happening, right? So let's investigate what's the reason for this weird behavior that is allowed. But first of all, I should delete this record because it clearly cannot exist, right? So I highlight the entire record, and on the tab Home, there is a button that says Delete. So I'm going to click it and delete the record. And then Microsoft says, you're about to delete 1 record. Do you want to proceed? Yes. So the record is gone, as you can see. What I didn't do with my database yet is I create tables and I fill them up with dummy data, but I did not create these links between the tables. That should be in place. So let's go ahead and fix that part. I'm going to save that and close my tables, all of them. So go ahead and click on the tab Database Tools, and on this ribbon, this place is called Ribbon on Microsoft Access. There is a button that says Relationships. So let's click on this button. What I want to do is visually show my tables and also create links between them in this visual environment. So I'm going to highlight all of my tables, clients, employees, and work completed, everything. And then I click the button Add. Then close this window. So all of my tables right now are showing as tables, quite literally. So I'm going to rearrange them so that my picture here looks pretty much like this entity relationship diagram that I had before. So I can obviously move these tables in this field, in this visual tool, and also resize them. So let's do that. I'm going to place clients on the far left, place employees on the far right, and place the junction table work completed in between them. All right. So how do I create relationships or lines, links between these tables? In my original design, the way how table clients is linked with table work completed is the primary key in the table clients, client ID, is inserted into the junction table work completed as the foreign key, and I called it client underscore ID, right? Because if you remember the rule that we discussed in class, every time when you have one-to-many relationship, in order to create that one-to-many relationship in the physical database design, the primary key from the one end of the relationship goes inside the many end of the relationship as the foreign key. So therefore, that's why I have a client ID as the foreign key right there. Okay, very good. So let's go back to our Microsoft Access. So essentially, the relationship between clients and work completed is client ID in the table clients linked or supposed to be linked with client underscore ID in the table work completed. So here's what I'm going to do. I will click on client ID, the primary key in the table clients, and without releasing the mouse, I will drag it physically onto the table work completed and drop it exactly on the top of client underscore ID. And I will see this window. Let's read what this window tells us. Edit relationship. It says you're about to create a link, a relationship between two tables. Table clients, field client ID is going to get related with table work completed, field client underscore ID. I agree with this, so I click on the button create, and you can see immediately that in my window I have the two fields linked with a straight line, just like it shows on my ER diagram. So that's good. I'm going to do the same procedure between the table employees and work completed. So the way how these two tables are linked is employee ID in one table is inserted into the column employee underscore ID in the table work completed. That essentially is the relationship. Primary key, foreign key. So I'm going to click and hold employee ID in the table employees, drag it to the table work completed, and drop on the top of employee underscore ID. And I see the same window that says you're about to create a relationship between table employees, field employee ID, and table work completed, field employee underscore ID. When I click create, I see similar thing happening. So I created apparently a relationship between the two tables. Okay, well, let's see if it worked or not. I'm gonna save it and close. So let's go back to my table work completed. I'm still kind of investigating why is that I am able to create non-existing clients and non-existing employees and send my non-existing employees to work on non-existing clients. So let's do the same stupid thing that we did before. Suppose on September the 12th, I'm sending my employee number 3 to work on my client number 3. Now reminder, I don't have an employee 3 or client number 3. Work description, something. And I did something for 4 hours. Okay, I hit enter. Next line is highlighted. So I still have this problem apparently, right? My data is committed to memory. It's part of the permanent storage. And it's perfectly fine right now that I have record about non-existing client and non-existing employee. So I didn't really fix anything by creating the relationship. So there is one more step that we need to do. But first, let's get rid of this dummy record that actually is not the right record. So I'm going to go ahead and click delete button, delete the record, delete one record, yes. Okay, so save it, let's close it, and let's go back to this database tool relationships, right, that we used before. Well, this is how we left it. Now, the way how we enforce the data integrity, that's what's really called data integrity. In other words, I cannot have records about non-existing clients and non-existing employees. The data should be self-consistent. The way how I enforce that is I click on the line, any of these two lines, and I highlight them. You can see that because the line becomes kind of darker, right, a thicker line. Then I right click on this line and I pick an option that says edit this relationship, and it shows me table or window that I've seen before pretty much. It says clients table, client ID field is related to work completed, client underscore ID. I'm going to check this checkbox, enforce referential integrity. And when I click OK button, see what happens? The Microsoft Access places a couple of symbols on both ends of my relationship. This one looks like a teeny tiny 1, and this one looks like a teeny tiny number 8, but put on the side, kind of turned 90 degrees. That's a symbol for infinity, right? That's Microsoft Access's way to say this relationship is one to many. So they use the symbol infinity for many. And that right now actually looks a lot like my original ER diagram, right? I had one to many. Well, Microsoft Access shows the same thing a little bit differently, 1 to plus infinity. So I will do the same exact thing with the second relationship. Click it, highlight it, right click, edit relationship, and checkbox must be checked, enforce referential integrity. Then I click OK button, and the same thing happens. Teeny tiny 1 and teeny tiny infinity, right? So employees and work completed are related as one to many. Well, let's save it. And let's close now and go back to my work completed. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to do exactly the same stuff, right? Try to enter information about non-existing clients and non-existing employees. Okay, so select the same date, September 12, 2016, doesn't matter. Let's see, work description. Now let's come up with something realistic. Database design, client negotiation. How about initial interview? Initial interview. And that's done for 4 hours, right? And let's say that I'm sending my employee number 3, which I don't have, to the client number 3, which I don't have. So now if I hit enter, Microsoft Access tells me you cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in the table employees. So it tells me that employee number 3, which I have right here, doesn't exist in the table employees, and I cannot really create the record which does not point, which points to the non-existing record in some other table. Okay, so I go back and I fix that. For example, I say employee number 2. I do have employee number 2, so that should be okay. Now I hit enter, and it says you cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in the table clients. In other words, now Microsoft Access says, yeah, I understand employee number 2 exists, so therefore it doesn't violate anything really, that's fine, but client number 3 doesn't exist. And we can have this record that points to non-existing record in some other table. So I'm going to fix that, put number 2, and I do have actually client number 2. So this record should be completely legitimate, right? Because both employees number 2 and client number 2, they do exist. And now if I hit enter, then this record is perfectly fine. It is saved. How can I tell? Because the next line is highlighted. So that works. And the reason why it works is exactly this. I have created relationships between the tables clients and work completed, and also employees and work completed. And also I enforce something that's called referential integrity between the two tables. What's a referential integrity? It's an internal tool of database. Pretty much any database has this tool, Microsoft Access being one of them. And this tool does actually a couple of things. Thing number one is, as you saw before, I cannot enter records that point to some other records in other tables that are not created, that do not exist, such as, for example, employee number 3 doesn't exist. So I can create a record that points to non-existing employee number 3. So that's one part of the referential integrity. Another part of referential integrity, let's save it, is that it will stop me from deleting records if they are linked with something else in other tables. Now what do I mean? Right now my table work completed contains records, for example, about client number 1, right? So the very first record has client ID number 1, and the second record has client ID number 1. What if I go into the table clients, here's my table clients, and I try to delete record number 1 about client ID 1. Let's try that. So I highlight the entire record, hit the delete button, and say delete records. and it says this record cannot be deleted or changed because table work completed includes related records. So in other words, because I have these two records right here that point to client number 1, I cannot delete client number 1 from the table clients. And the mechanism that prevents me from doing that is exactly the same. It's referential integrity. So in other words, referential integrity is there for a couple of reasons. Number one, I cannot create records that point to non-existing records in other tables, such as employee ID number 3 if I don't have employee ID number 3. That's one. And number two, existing records that I have in some tables, if I try to delete them and they will leave some other records in other tables to point nowhere, that is also prohibited. And the mechanism that prohibits that is referential integrity. In other words, if I delete client ID number 1, and these two records in the table work completed will point nowhere essentially. They become orphans, so to speak, right? They point to non-existing client, and that cannot happen. And the mechanism that prohibits that is referential integrity. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And this is the end of our part 3 of Microsoft Access tutorial. And in the next parts that will follow, 4 and so on, we will actually look at other parts of the generic information system. So this is the end of part where we deal with storage or create tables and create relationships between tables and enforce referential integrity. So in the parts that follow, we'll look at inputs, processing, and outputs. Okay.